B Company had been bleeding on the Kunai slope for 2 hours. Under relentless machine gun fire and grenades, every push forward ended the same way. Men dragged back or left twisting where they fell. Tom Derrick watched another platoon get cut down trying to reach the cliff face. The Japanese had turned geometry into a death trap, each position covering the others. No angle of approach that didn't feed into their crossfire. 2 battalions had already failed to take this hill. Without it, the Allies couldn't push north. With it, the Japanese defensive line would crack. The withdrawal order came through the radio. Derrick turned to his company commander. "Bugger the CO. Just give me 20 more minutes." He dropped flat, started crawling toward the cliff, grenades stuffed in his tunic, while bullets snapped overhead. The men couldn't believe what they saw. They called it Derricks Show. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, many Australians watched from a distance. But when France fell in June 1940, the war stopped feeling remote. Britain now stood alone, and Australia, still tied to the Empire, faced a grim truth. No one was coming to save them if Japan made a move. On July 5, 1940, 26-year-old Tom Derrick walked into the recruitment office at Glossop, South Australia. The eldest of 6 children, from a working-class family in Medindi, Derrick knew about fighting for survival long before he picked up a rifle. His father, David, a former soldier who'd emigrated from Dublin, barely earned enough at the South Australian Harbour Board to keep shoes on his children's feet. Tom had left school early to work, eventually managing a vineyard at Winkie for 9 years. Just 14 months earlier, he'd married 16-year-old Clarence Violet Barrel Leslie after meeting her at an Adelaide dance hall. Now, with war on Australia's doorstep, he traded his farm manager's responsibilities for a soldier's rifle and pack. Assigned to the 2nd 48th Infantry Battalion as a private, Army discipline chafed against his independent streak, but something about the life still appealed to him. During training in the Adelaide Hills, at places like Woodside and the Wayville Showgrounds, he thrived on the physical demands, even if the strict rules grated at times. By October, the 2nd 48th Battalion was ready to move. They paraded through Adelaide, then boarded the ocean liner SS Stratton on November 17th, bound for Palestine. Derrick made his mark early. He slipped ashore without leave in Perth, spent time locked up on the ship for his AWOL spree, and was fined for flooring a soldier who taunted him about getting caught. Still, Stratton kept barreling forward. The 2nd 48th Battalion disembarked in Palestine, diving into brutal desert warfare training at El Kantara. Derrick's natural athleticism shone as he won cross-country races, while his jovial personality made him popular off-duty. He organized gambling sessions and kept a book on the outcomes of athletic events. In March 1941, orders came to move through Egypt into Libya, but when Rommel's Africa Corps launched a devastating offensive, the Australians found themselves rushed to the strategic port city of Tobruk. For 8 relentless months, around 27,000 Allied troops, 14,000 of them Australian, held the vital port under constant threat. German and Italian forces surrounded them with tanks, artillery, and waves of infantry, cutting off supplies and hammering their defenses day and night. The city's streets turned into a battlefield of rubble and fire, with snipers prowling the ruins and supply convoys running a lethal gauntlet. Starvation, disease, and exhaustion weighed heavily, but the defenders refused to yield. The Nazi propagandist William Lord Haw-Haw Joyce mocked them as the, quote, rats of Tobruk. The insult was meant to demoralize them. It had the opposite effect on men like Derrick. Instead, the soldiers embraced the name with fierce pride, even crafting unofficial medals featuring tiny rats from scrap metal. In this crucible of constant danger, Derrick's true nature emerged. Night after night, Derrick led fighting patrols into the barren, dangerous no man's land surrounding Tobruk. Clutching his captured Italian Breda machine gun, he and his men moved silently through shattered terrain, scouting enemy positions, probing defenses, and striking with sudden bursts of fire before melting back into the shadows. Finally, on April 30th, Axis forces smashed through Australian lines. The following evening, the 248th Battalion launched a counterattack through the gathering dusk. Derrick would later describe it as, quote, a Bobby Dazzler of a firefight. Though his casual words couldn't capture the horror, men dropping around him as tracer rounds carved arcs through the dark, his steadiness under fire did not go unnoticed. He was promoted to corporal on the spot. A recommendation for the military medal followed, but it never came. In late May, Derrick caught it, a flicker of something off. A man in British tank gear was moving just a little too carefully. The uniform was right, but the eyes weren't. Derrick didn't hesitate. He stepped in, played along, then flipped the script with icy calm precision. One sharp move, and the German spy was cornered and in custody before anyone else had clocked the danger. For this and other reasons, by September, he was promoted to platoon sergeant. Yet beneath his outward courage, Derrick's diary revealed vulnerability. He wrote honestly about his, quote, constant fear of dying. Finally, after months of relentless fighting, the battalion was withdrawn from Tobruk in October 1941. The sand shimmered with heat as they returned to Palestine, but respite was brief. By July 1942, the 2nd 48th found themselves rushed to El Alamein, where the British 8th Army was making its desperate stand against Rommel. On July 10th, during the First Battle of El Alamein, Derrick moved with the 26th Australian Brigade in their assault on Tel Alesa. Under a relentless hail of German grenades, he led the charge straight at 3 machine gun nests. Bullets whipped past, explosions rocked the ground, but Derrick pushed forward, smashing the positions one by one. When the smoke cleared, over 100 enemy soldiers lay captured in their wake. As night fell, with the thunder of German tanks pounding the earth in a fierce counterattack, enemy infantry poured out behind the armor, tightening the noose. Derrick's company didn't hesitate. They surged forward, crashing headlong into the advancing formation. Amid the chaos, witnesses stood in stunned silence as Derrick moved like a ghost through the battlefield. With nerves of steel, he slipped close enough to plant sticky bombs on 2 German tanks, blowing them apart before the enemy could react. For his leadership and courage at Tel Alesa, Derrick received the Distinguished Conduct Medal. Promoted to sergeant on July 28th, Derrick led a crucial 6-man reconnaissance mission on October 3rd. Moving carefully through dusty, enemy-held terrain, they slipped past patrols and sniper fire to pinpoint German machine gun positions, vital targets for the upcoming Second Battle of El Alamein. Months later, when battle erupted on October 23rd, Private Joe Rada witnessed something extraordinary. At one point, Derrick leapt onto an Allied gun carrier, rolling toward the German lines. Rada said, quote, "We could see divers standing in the carrier, Tommy gun in hand, the top half of his body exposed. It was like a chap riding a horse into a hail of fire. You could hear the bullets splattering off the metal sides of the carrier. I thought, God, he'll never come out of that." He took out 3 machine gun nests while exposed in the open. Then he had the driver back up to each position, making sure every post was neutralized. By morning, his platoon held all 3 posts. Those who saw it believed Derrick was destined for the Victoria Cross, though no recommendation came at the time. A week later, with all officers wounded, Derrick stepped up to command his company, leading through fierce fighting until shrapnel caught him. The wounds were minor, but they forced him back to Gaza. Finally, in January 1943, the 2nd 48th Battalion sailed for Australia, carrying their hard-won experience toward an entirely different kind of warfare. Derrick enjoyed a brief leave with Beryl in Adelaide, precious stolen moments of normalcy before the war pulled him back in. By August, the 2nd 48th was sailing for New Guinea, bound for the steaming jungles of Milne Bay. Derrick was temporarily attached to the 21st Brigade headquarters, though lingering eye injuries from North Africa caught up with him and put him briefly in the hospital. He recovered just in time for the next push. The plan was clear: land on Red Beach and fight west through 30 kilometers of thick jungle toward Lae. After the open deserts of North Africa, this terrain felt claustrophobic and disorienting. Now they were fighting the Japanese, hidden in the undergrowth, dug into ridges, waiting in ambush. Every shadow could conceal an enemy. On September 4th, after a heavy naval bombardment from American destroyers, Derrick's wave hit the shore. Japanese resistance was lighter than expected, and casualties were few, but the hard work was still ahead. 10 days later, his platoon led the charge as C Company captured the Malahang airstrip. When Lae fell on September 16th, Derrick dryly noted in his diary his thoughts on the retreating Japanese, writing that his, quote, greatest problem was trying to catch up. November 1943 brought the 2nd 48th Battalion face-to-face with Settelberg, a fortress-like hill rising 1,000 meters above the Finschhafen region. Dense jungle cloaked its slopes, while Japanese defenders had turned every ridge into interlocking fields of fire. By November 20th, Derrick found himself commanding B Company's 11th platoon. They had lost all but one of their leaders. 2 days later, the battalions had clawed close to the summit, but a landslide blocked the only road. The final assault would be made by infantry alone. November 24th dawned with orders for B Company to outflank a Japanese position on a cliff face. Their only approach was a slope covered in kunai grass directly beneath the cliffs, ground where movement drew instant fire. For 2 hours, Australian troops made repeated attempts to scale the slope. Each time, intense machine gun fire and grenade attacks drove them back, leaving wounded men scattered across the grass. As dusk closed in, the situation looked grim. Pushing forward was out of the question, and even holding the ground they'd taken seemed like a long shot. The order came down. Pull back. Derrick didn't flinch. He turned to his immediate company commander and said, quote, "Bugger the CO. Just give me 20 more minutes and we'll have this place. Tell him I'm pinned down and can't get out." Derrick dropped low and crawled beneath whistling rifle fire and the crack of machine guns. Closing in on the enemy post that pinned down his men, he hurled 2 grenades into the nest. The blast sent bodies flying and weapons clattering, clearing the way forward. He then ordered his 2nd section around the right flank, hoping to sweep the ridge from the side. But the second they moved, 6 Japanese positions opened up at once. Machine guns, rifles, even mortars, pinning them in place. Rounds slammed into tree trunks and the ground beside them. Without hesitation, Derrick began climbing the steep cliff, fighting for purchase on slick vines and twisted roots as bullets tore past him. He finally pulled himself over the edge. Without pause, he surged forward, scrambling from outcrop to outcrop, grenades stuffed in his tunic, rifle slung low across his back. One hand clinging to the jagged rock, the other flung grenades straight into the enemy's weapon pits, which witnesses described like he was, quote, "shooting for a goal at basketball." Bursts of fire lit up the ridge, but Derrick didn't stop. Men who saw his actions recounted, quote, "On 4 separate occasions, he dashed forward and threw grenades at a range of 6 to 8 yards until these positions were finally silenced." In total, Derrick had single-handedly reduced 10 enemy posts. Climbing higher, in full view of the enemy, he kept up the assault, switching to his rifle, picking off defenders, and hurling more grenades into foxholes. Shouts and scattered fire answered back, but within 20 minutes, the peak was his. Japanese soldiers began to flee, some abandoning their positions without firing another shot. But the sergeant wasn't finished yet. Standing atop the cliff he had just conquered, Derrick spotted 3 more enemy posts dug into the jungle just ahead. Most soldiers would have dug in and waited for support. He didn't. He quickly returned to his platoon, rallied his 1st and 3rd sections, and launched an immediate assault, relentlessly pressing the attack until every enemy position was secured. The rest of the battalion took Settelberg unopposed the following morning. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Ainsley insisted that Derrick personally raise the Australian flag over the town at 10 o'clock on November 25, 1943. The assault became known as Derricks Show. Ainsley credited Derrick's leadership and refusal to quit for the victory, recommending him for the Victoria Cross, citing his, quote, "most conspicuous courage, outstanding leadership, and devotion to duty." After the triumph at Settelberg, the 2nd 48th Battalion returned to Australia in February 1944. Derrick's homecoming with Beryl was everything both had dreamed of, but malaria soon hospitalized him, a reminder that the jungle claimed its toll in many ways. By August 1944, he was posted to an officer cadet training unit in Victoria. In an unusual move requiring much lobbying, Derrick specifically requested to return to the 2nd 48th Battalion after commissioning. On November 26, 1944, Thomas Curry Derrick was commissioned as a lieutenant. His return to the 2nd 48th as a reinforcement officer was met with great jubilation from the men who knew his worth. In April 1945, the battalion was transported to Morotai, the staging ground for the Allied invasion. From there, they prepared to strike Tarakan, an island off Borneo, fortified with fierce Japanese defenses. Then, on May 1st, 1945, that preparation exploded into action. Allied naval guns and aircraft unleashed a thunderous barrage on Tarakan Island. Shells tore through jungle and bunkers, flames lit the sky, and the ground shook with every blast. Lieutenant Derrick led his men ashore in the first waves. As landing craft hit the beach, smoke and sand filled the air. Mortars burst in the treetops, machine gun fire cut across the shoreline, and Derrick drove his men forward, shouting orders through the chaos. The Japanese were dug in and ready. Hardened by earlier campaigns, they turned Tarakan into a fortress. Every advance was met with fierce resistance. Derrick would later tell the Sunday Sun newspaper that he had, quote, never struck anything so tough as the Japanese on Tarakan. From May 19th, the 2nd 48th Battalion's main objective became a heavily defended hill, codenamed Frida. Derrick's platoon probed Japanese positions, losing men in the process. Casualties he recorded in his diary as a bad show. On May 21st, he debated tactics with Lieutenant Colonel Bob Ainsley, successfully arguing for a company-strength assault on Frida. That night, Derrick was in unusually high spirits, possibly trying to boost his platoon's morale. May 22nd dawned with artillery as Derrick's platoon, reinforced by another unit, launched their assault on the well-defended knoll near Hill Frida. Derrick coordinated both platoons during the final assault, his voice cutting through the din as he directed fire and movement. When the knoll finally fell, the two platoons, reinforced by commando sections, dug in for the inevitable Japanese counterattack. Then, at approximately 3:30 a.m. on May 23rd, a Japanese light machine gun suddenly ripped through the night, spraying the Australian position with fire. Muzzle flashes flared briefly in the dark, but visibility was near zero. Derrick couldn't see his men clearly or tell who had been hit. In an act characteristic of his leadership, Tom Derrick sat upright to check on his men's welfare, exposing himself above the shallow earthworks. The machine gun's second burst came fast, and this time it found its mark. 5 rounds tore through him, from his left hip to the right side of his chest. His runner, Curly Colby, crawled through the dirt and dragged him behind cover, just as Japanese troops began probing the lines. By 4 a.m., a full assault was underway, and any hope of evacuation vanished. Despite the pain, Derrick propped himself up against the base of a tree and kept issuing calm, steady orders, directing his platoon through the darkness as the battle raged on. One historian recounted how, quote, he lay back quietly and after a time said to a mate, "I've had it. That's that. Right to barrel." He continued to direct operations until mid-morning. Then they carried him back, his grin and his courage never deserting him. As dawn broke over Hill Frida, it revealed the cruel irony. Derrick's platoon was directly overlooked by a Japanese bunker that had escaped detection. As finally reached the position, Derrick insisted that other wounded men be attended to first. They carried Lieutenant Tom Derrick off Frida that morning. At the hospital, surgeons discovered bullets had severely damaged his liver. Thomas Curry Derrick lost his life on May 24th, 1945, during a second operation on his wounds. He was buried that afternoon in the 2nd 48th Battalion Cemetery on Tarakan, later reinterred at Labuan War Cemetery. One soldier captured the feeling perfectly. It felt as if, quote, the whole war stopped. Even the Japanese attempted to exploit his loss for propaganda, printing leaflets and broadcasting taunts over, quote, Derrick's demise, though these had little impact on Australian soldiers. Historian Michael McKernan observed that Derrick arguably deserved, quote, a Victoria Cross and 2 bars for his actions at El Alamein, Saddleberg, and Tarakan. On May 7, 1947, Beryl received her husband's Victoria Cross and Distinguished Conduct Medal in Adelaide. His portrait now hangs in the Australian War Memorial's Hall of Valour, and his name lives on through memorials like the Tom Diver Derrick Bridge in South Australia.